Lucas Pereira has always been a man of logic and reason. Raised in an orphanage after the mysterious death of his parents, he never had a peaceful childhood. The pain of loss marked him constantly, but instead of seeking solace in God, he took refuge in books, theology, and philosophy. Faith, to him, always seemed more like a human construct than a divine truth. He believed that the great mysteries of life, such as the purpose of existence and life after death, were nothing more than illusions, created by human weaknesses. But deep down, a small flame of doubt always bothered him, something he could not explain, but that never stopped haunting him. It all began on a gray afternoon when, while rummaging through the old office of his grandfather, a renowned missionary and theologian, Lucas found something that would change his life forever. Among yellowed papers and books worn by the passage of time, he discovered a peculiar diary. It was the description of a forgotten prophecy, one that spoke of the opening of the eternal gates, a legend that said that when humanity was at the height of despair, the gates of heaven would open. Those words, despite involving a belief that he rejected, caused a shock in his heart. He did not know if it was a divine message or just another creation of a man desperate for answers. But something deep inside him drove him to investigate further, and on his journey, he did not know that that small act would lead him to confront the greatest question of his life. What is true salvation? Lucas spent days immersed in those books and his grandfather's notes. The words of the prophecy echoed in his mind like a distant whisper, something he could not ignore, but at the same time it seemed too irrational to be real. He studied the scriptures and compared them with the hidden texts in the journal. It was as if, somehow, he was being pulled into something he did not understand. For weeks, Lucas questioned the very foundations of his faith. He had never believed in supernatural revelations or miracles, but here, faced with that prophecy and the atmosphere of growing chaos around the world, something made him feel that the impossible might be possible. The world, meanwhile, was sinking into an abyss of despair. Political crises, wars, and social tensions were reaching catastrophic proportions. People were losing hope, and many began to wonder if God still cared about the fate of humanity. The anonymous mystic who preached, "The gates of heaven are closer than ever," was becoming a cult figure for those seeking answers. Although many dismissed him as a charlatan, something about his words seemed to touch people on a deep, almost visceral level. Lucas, however, remained skeptical. How could he believe in something so intangible when human pain seemed so real, so brutal? He could not understand how there could be a promised heaven when the suffering on earth seemed endless. It was during one of these nights of intensive study that Lucas met Marta. She was not someone he was looking for, but rather an unexpected presence in his life. He found her in a small street bookstore where she was sitting on an old wooden chair, leafing through a prayer book. Marta, an elderly woman with wrinkled skin and snow-white hair, had a serene expression, almost as if she carried within her a peace he had never known. When their eyes met, Lucas felt an inexplicable chill, something that made him want to talk to her. Perhaps it was the quiet strength that emanated from her eyes, which seemed to see beyond the surface. Martha, unlike Luke, was not a skeptic, but had a deep faith built over a lifetime of challenges and loneliness. She had heard the sermons about the opening of the eternal gates and felt that the time was coming for humanity. But for her, the heavenly promise could not be forced or manipulated. She believed that heaven was a gift to those who truly followed the paths of justice and love, and not a prize, to be won through violent sacrifices as advocated by the pilgrims of eternity. As she heard Luke speak of his doubt, she realized that he was on the verge of a great revelation, and that perhaps she would be the one to help guide him, like a light that illuminates the path of someone lost in the darkness. Martha and Luke began meeting regularly. She listened patiently, offering wise counsel and stories from her own faith journey, marked by loss and triumph. While Luke struggled with his beliefs, Seeking answers in the scriptures and the words of his grandfather, Martha shared with him passages that spoke of God's unconditional love, Christ's sacrifice, and forgiveness that transcended human pain. She believed that true faith was not about seeking answers, but about trusting in the divine mystery, even when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. Luke, though still reluctant, began to sense something new in her words, a peace he had never experienced before. It was as if, through her, he saw a form of faith that was not built on logic or evidence, but on the confidence that heaven could be real, even if it was not fully understood. Meanwhile, the threat of the Pilgrims of Eternity cult grew ever more imminent. Abner, the charismatic leader, spread his message with fervor and conviction, and his words began to attract more and more followers. He preached that humanity needed to be purified, that the only way to achieve salvation was through forced repentance, a repentance that would come through a cataclysm imposed on the earth. Abner's followers believed that this final sacrifice would open the gates of heaven, but in reality, Abner was playing on people's fears, promising a quick and indisputable salvation. To Luke, this all seemed like a distortion of the true divine message, and he felt increasingly compelled to stop the cult from achieving its destructive goals. However, as he delved deeper into his investigation, Luke also began to question whether he really had the strength to stand up to someone as powerful as Abner and his distorted view of what salvation was. The tension in the world seemed to grow with each passing day. News of the advance of the Eternity Pilgrims grew more alarming, and Abner's followers were increasingly ready to take action, convinced that the end was near and that the only way to save humanity was through the cataclysm he preached. Luke, though hesitant, knew he had a mission before him. He could not allow this distortion of faith to lead more people to believe that salvation could be obtained by force. More importantly, he knew he needed to understand once and for all what the true promise of heaven really meant. It was Martha who encouraged him to make a pilgrimage to an ancient monastery in the countryside, where a secluded monk who had spent his life meditating was said to have visions of heaven and earth. He had never been disturbed by anyone, but Martha believed that the monk's wisdom could provide Luke with the answers he so desperately sought. When he arrived there, Luke felt a disconcerting calm, a profound peace that contrasted with the world in chaos around him. The monk, a man with a white beard and piercing eyes, looked at Luke with an intensity that almost disarmed him. "Heaven is not a distant place," the monk said in a soft but authoritative voice. "It is in every heart that seeks truth and peace. What Abner proposes is a lie, a tragedy that will lead many to destruction. For heaven is not won by force, but by purity of soul." These words struck Luke deeply, but he was still unsure how he could actually stop what was already in motion in the world. Lucas spent sleepless nights pondering the monk's words. Although they had touched something deep in his heart, he knew he was still far from understanding the magnitude of what was at stake. Heaven, as the monk said, was not far away, but within each human being who surrendered to truth and peace. This made sense to him, but what to do with Abner's distorted vision that was drawing so many people together? How could Lucas combat a faith that seemed so appealing to the desperate? The answer he sought was still far away, but he knew he had to act before it was too late. His heart, though restless, was growing stronger in its resolve. Upon returning to the city, Luke found Martha waiting for him, her expression more worried than usual. The news was grim. The Pilgrims of Eternity were closer to carrying out what Abner called the ultimate sacrifice. A grand ceremony was scheduled for the following Sunday, and Abner's followers were gathering in droves. The tension in the city was palpable. Luke felt an immense pressure on his shoulders. He knew that this would be the decisive moment, the one in which true faith would have to prevail over Abner's manipulation. Martha, with her serene gaze, told him, "No matter what happens, heaven will always be a place of love, not terror. The truth is with you, Luke. Whatever you choose, Choose with a pure heart. These simple but powerful words gave him the strength he needed to move forward. He knew that his faith was still being forged, but he was ready to face the spiritual battle that lay ahead. The day of the ceremony arrived, and Luke knew there was no time to waste. He and Martha made their way to the town square where Abner had gathered his followers. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the air were filled with a dark energy, a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Abner's followers were dressed in simple, almost monastic clothing, their faces hardened by the belief that they were about to achieve salvation through the imposed sacrifice. Luke watched with a watchful eye, his heart pounding. He knew he had to stop this event before it was too late. As the ceremony began, Abner stepped up to the makeshift altar, a platform made of old, broken wood, and began preaching about the purification necessary for humanity to be saved. His words were filled with conviction and anger, and his followers watched him as if he were the very voice of God. Luke, without hesitation, approached the crowd. He knew that his mission was not only to stop the sacrifice, but also to reveal the truth about true faith, the kind that is not based on fear, but on the love and grace of God. As he approached Abner, he felt a tension in the air, as if all eyes in the crowd were fixed on him, awaiting confrontation. He was no longer the skeptical young theologian who had arrived at the monastery. He was ready to face his own doubt and reveal the true light, the one that came from heaven. "Abner!" Lucas shouted, his voice strong and full of authority. The cult leader paused for a moment, staring at him. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. The crowd fell silent, and the weight of the moment seemed to weigh heavily on the shoulders of everyone present. Heaven is not a prize to be won by force. It is not a place to be reached through fear and destruction, Lucas said with unexpected calm. Salvation comes through divine grace, sincere repentance, and the pursuit of love. What you are preaching is a lie. Lucas's words were charged with a sincerity that shook the confidence of many of Abner's followers. Some seemed to hesitate, while others continued to stare, unsure of what was at stake. Abner, however, did not seem willing to budge. "You are wrong, Lucas. Forced repentance is the only path to purification. The ultimate sacrifice is necessary to open the gates of heaven." His voice was thick with fury, but there was a growing nervousness in it. He knew that what Lucas was saying was touching something inside him, something he was trying to hide. The tension between the two grew as the words grew more intense. Lucas could not let that distorted view prevail. He knew that the battle was not just physical, but spiritual. He was at a crossroads in his own faith, where he would need to confront his own fears and doubts. The crowd began to divide, some slowly backing away, others resisting Lucas's words. Abner, feeling his leadership challenged, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Lucas, as if trying to intimidate him. "Do you think you can stop what is about to happen? That you have the power to change God's will?" Abner asked, with an arrogant smile. Lucas felt a wave of heat rise in his chest, but he did not waver. He knew he was not alone. In his mind, Martha's words and the lessons he had learned over the past few days formed, bringing him renewed confidence. He took a deep breath and replied firmly, "True faith does not demand bloody sacrifices, Abner. It demands compassion, forgiveness, and the pursuit of peace. You cannot force the gates of heaven. They open only to those who are pure of heart." The silence in the square was absolute. The tension between Luke and Abner seemed to hang in the air, like a storm about to break out. But contrary to what Abner had expected, there was no outburst of violence, no act of force. What followed was something deeper and more transformative. One by one, Abner's followers began to drift away. Some looked at Luke, their faces etched with doubt, as if they were finally beginning to question what they had been forced to believe. Others silently lowered their heads, as if they felt the weight of the truth in Luke's words. Abner, lost in his own rage, tried to shout to maintain control, but his voice no longer had the power it had before. The fallacy, of his preaching was being undone, and the light of truth was beginning to infiltrate the hearts of those who had been blind to it until then. Luke, seeing the crowd disperse, felt a sense of peace begin to invade his heart. He knew that the spiritual battle had not ended there, that the internal struggles would continue, but at that moment, he felt a renewal in his faith. He finally understood what Martha had always told him. Heaven was not something to be conquered, but a gift offered to those who, with a pure heart, sought true transformation. Abner, defeated, left in silence, and Luke stood there, in the middle of the square, with a feeling of mission accomplished. But more importantly, he felt a new beginning. He did not know what the future held for him, but he knew that, with true faith in his heart, he was ready to face any challenge. The opening of the eternal doors was closer than ever, and now he knew that, to reach them, all he had to do was believe in the goodness, love, and grace of God. Luke's journey was just beginning, but for the first time he felt at peace with himself and with the world around him.